The MCU has had a sort of pallor cast over it for 2 years now, ever since the world lost the great Chadwick Boseman. There have been tens of thousands of words written poetically and poignantly about his tragic passing, and rather than try and say something new about the sadness, the unfairness, how he left us decades too soon, I'd like to instead take a look at how his passing affected Ryan Coogler in particular. The director has grieved and mourned not only someone he had a critical working relationship with, but an incredibly dear friend. On top of that, before Chadwick's passing, Coogler had finished a script for his follow-up to the iconic behemoth that is Black Panther. So not only was he forced to grieve, but in choosing to go back to work on the sequel, he placed an impossible, entirely unenviable task upon himself, his cast, and the crew to make a Black Panther film absent of their Black Panther. What we got as a result of this is Wakanda Forever, and before I talk about how I feel about this film, let me put this asterisk over all my thoughts to come. The fact that Coogler and his cast and his crew made this film is admirable. The fact that it manages to mostly work is almost a triumph, and if its main objective was to pay tribute to Chadwick Boseman, then in that respect, the film succeeds in a massive way. It's been out for a week now, and the reality is that it's going to take time to really come to terms with everything it has going on. It's not just a long, epic film, it's also a film that has a lot to say about grief, and a lot of it is deeply profound, remorseful, and even cathartic. But, and this is a big but, not everything here works. I don't want there to be any misconception. This film is powerful, but it's also something rolling across rough terrain as it navigates the shift of its own production, but also its place and the place of the Black Panther franchise and all of its mythology among the MCU. And that's often its biggest stumbling block. Despite Ryan Coogler's passion, despite how this stands tall as one of the most clearly director-driven MCU films, it is still an MCU film nonetheless. And so you've got tie-ins to other MCU properties that distract from the core of the film. You've got some tonal inconsistencies, and you also got character and story decisions that feel unmotivated beyond propelling the plot along and instigating the almost compulsory final battle. And when I first saw the film, those things, they grated on me a little bit. Let's be honest here. But you know what? I've had some time to think on it, and while the film's issues are still, well, issues, I think I see some of the intent behind those decisions a little more clearly. But, you know, just because something works doesn't mean it can't be improved, so that's why whenever I shop online, I use Rakuten to improve my experience. Rakuten is the largest cashback site which partners with over 3,500 of the biggest name brands like Kohl's, Macy's, Best Buy, Walmart, and more to bring you cashback, coupons, and promo codes, all for free. Yeah, you heard that right. Whenever I'm pre-ordering steelbooks from Best Buy or Blu-rays from Walmart, I'm always, and I mean always, using Rakuten, so I get the best deal possible. I bet Riri Williams used the shit out of Rakuten when she was buying all the materials for the first Ironheart Mark I suit. Maybe that's how she got the nice speaker, Okoye sliced in half. Ah well. But still, she was able to get it using Rakuten. And you can too. Get a leg up on those Black Friday or Cyber Monday sales and click the link in the description or go to the URL www.rakuten.com/r/griff18322 and you get a $40 sign-up bonus when you make a qualifying purchase. It's as easy as 1, 2, 3. Again, click the link in my description or go to this URL to get a $40 sign-up bonus, and thank you so much to Rakuten for sponsoring this video. How do you grieve an icon? A man who was standing at the forefront of everyone, not just in a fictional world, but in the real world as well, and allowed people's emotions to be understood. That was a thing Coogler was tackling with Wakanda Forever. The loss of his dear friend, but also the world's loss of the Black Panther, a character who is an inspiration for people all over the world. Coogler has always set out to tell stories about overcoming grief and accepting loss, even though it's so painful. now. To celebrate the life people have had, it's a consistent theme going all the way back to his first film, Fruitvale Station. This meditation on death is a core theme of this film. In Wakanda Forever, Shuri's internal struggle is how we get to see this represented. The prologue of this film sets up her headspace. She's frantically working, trying to save T'Challa, creating a new version of the heart herb to cure his disease after Killmonger burned the crop to the ground in the first movie. She uses every ounce of her scientific ability and the advanced technologies of Wakanda, along with praying to her gods to help her. But as we all know, she's tragically too late. She fails to save him. This fractures her. She's a woman whose beliefs, whose spirit is split between these differing ideas, and rather than reconciling them, she shuts her spiritual side out, convincing herself externally that technology and science are the only truths, while internally, the part of her mind that was raised on Wakandan beliefs is shut off, but still lingers, even festers within her mind. As much as this focus for Shuri represents the core themes Coogler often explores, it also, in some ways, functions as Coogler's avatar for grief. You can argue that she's also a surrogate for the grieving audience in the sense that she's processing the loss, but the reality is that Ryan Coogler was closer to Chadwick Boseman than probably anyone watching this, and there's a sense of catharsis for him in the way he shapes Shuri's arc in the film. He's letting go just as much as she is, but he makes it compelling because he doesn't write Shuri as if Letitia Wright is just a megaphone for his emotions. Shuri is a character that's allowed to be human, to go through her own grieving process. Why place her faith in something that defies her reason? It's especially heightened because of the guilt she feels for T'Challa's death. She feels she could have prevented it. She could have saved him. How does it make sense that the ancestors would give her these gifts, but she couldn't use them to save her brother? The thing is, grief brings some of our ugliest emotions to the surface. This film explores a lot of the sheer anger that is birthed out of trauma, tragedy, and loss. We see this through Namor, Queen Ramonda, Shuri, especially in the back half of the film, and the ways in which we let that anger dictate our response, our emotions, our resolve. Eric Killmonger is ultimately what they will become if they let their anger define them, hence why he's who Shuri sees when she enters the ancestral plane. How do you overcome that anger, that thirst for vengeance? How do you not fall to that dark side of grief? How can you use it to build yourself up, become an even better person? Wakanda ponders the lasting impact of T'Challa's memory. Will it save them or drown them? Their belief in their culture feels scattered, lost, in complete disarray. Some cling to tradition while others try and trudge a new path forward. This is not just caused by the death of their king. Wakanda has had to bounce back from this before after the events of Civil War and the death of King T'Chaka. The royal Wakandan family has lost so much, and so has the kingdom of Wakanda in losing their king, but they have also lost what gives them hope. They have lost their protector, the Black Panther. Wakanda is a more public nation than ever before because of the actions of King T'Challa. Vibranium, which had been a rare resource, has become much more akin to that of oil. They feel weakened, exposed. Traditionalists like M'Baku don't necessarily agree with the late king's choice to open Wakanda to the world, share their knowledge, wealth, and resources, but he also understands and respects that decision. However, despite how noble T'Challa's intent was behind his actions of opening Wakanda and revealing vibranium to the world, it had some unintended consequences. It put other nations, such as Talokan, the underwater civilization ruled by King Namor, has been put in danger as a frantic race for vibranium, and weaponizing vibranium from all nations begins. Before the start of the movie, Talokan is much like Wakanda before the events of the first Black Panther, using vibranium to fuel their civilization and remaining hidden from society. With the world now on a hunt for vibranium, nations are unearthing Talokan, which in turn makes Namor want to protect his people. It's backing him into a corner. He's turning into this big mama bear for his people. A lot of parallels can be drawn between Namor and T'Challa. They both ruled their isolated nations, were their protectors, and they they feel a deep compassion for their respective people. There is a key difference, though, in the fact that T'Challa is seen as a king, while Namor is seen as a god. The imperialistic ways of the world have had a deep effect on both Wakanda and Talokan. In Mesoamerica, smallpox were brought over by colonizers along with many other diseases, which laid waste to civilizations that had no immunities to the disease, and the natives were also enslaved. This very thing affects Namor's people, so they take their faith in one of their gods, and through that faith are given the power to overcome the illness, but in turn can no longer breathe air and start a new civilization in the water. Namor is the first to be born in these new conditions that mutated his genome and in turn was seen as the serpent god with his winged feet. This process also made him age much more slowly, allowing him to rule over his people for generations. After some time, his mother, who loved the original home on the surface, dies and wishes to be buried on the soil that she came from. When they emerge from the water for the service, they find another instance of how cruel humanity can be. Colonization, which has resulted in the native people being enslaved. Namor is outraged and burns the plantation to the ground, foreshadowing for what he hopes to do with the rest of the surface world. These God-fearing Spanish conquistadors curse him with the name Namor, the child without love. It's in that moment that an enemy of the surface world is created. This hate that lives inside of Namor makes his morals align closely to that of Killmonger in the first movie. Where everything was taken from Killmonger, Namor lives with the fear that everything will be taken from him. He needs to strike back. The horrors that have come onto his people because of the surface world need to be rectified. So while the American government is mining for vibranium ore in the ocean they attack, they use the nightmares of the sea set in our minds from the time of sailors to their advantage, acting like sirens in the water with a haunting song that establishes their ominous presence throughout the rest of the film. The arrival of the Talokanians? The people of Talokan, sure, let's go with that, is one of the most effective and unsettling sequences that I think the MCU has ever seen. I mean, it just is operating on an entirely different level. Like, this is something I think I would have seen in like a Pirates of the Caribbean movie. It's so goddamn incredible. After they decimate the ship and return the vibranium to the sea, the blame is shifted to the grieving Wakandans being framed for the actions of Talokan, taking advantage of their state of flux and exploiting their emotional state. Imperialistic tendencies echo throughout the story, though, even in Namor himself. Talokan is using the same tactics to try and pit the rest of the world against a weakened Wakanda, much like how colonizers would pit differing tribes against each other as well. In not revealing themselves and allowing the world to think that Wakanda is attacking nations who try to get vibranium, they are playing into the exact ideologies that Namor is fighting against. This is all put on the heavy shoulders of the current leaders of Wakanda as they try to figure out how to best deal with this crisis. Queen Ramonda, T'Challa's mother, who was reinstated as the leader of Wakanda after his passing, meets with the United Nations to discuss the dangers of what they are doing, of weaponizing and stealing vibranium. All blame is put on the Wakandans, who truly were trying to still take the steps T'Challa wanted in making a more unified world, in helping those in need with their resources and technology. But it's really tough to do that. It's tough to carry on with the wishes of a dead man if you don't fully believe in them. And who are we to say whether it's what they would have wanted, how they would have acted? That's a big point of meditation for Coogler in this film. The idea of discerning and honoring the wishes of the deceased. Is it truly what this person would have wanted? No one will ever know, but I think it's clear to say they would want you to do what you feel is best, to do what's going to help you the most, to be your own person. And it's not the easiest path to learning to accept that. Even through their mourning, which Ramonda has to go through while leading one of the most powerful nations in the world, they still want to see how Wakanda can assist the world. Unfortunately, many world leaders don't recognize the grief that some of the Wakandans are going through, that Queen Ramonda is going through, as they're still expecting Wakanda to honor their agreement, to assist the world and share their resources with everyone. A moving speech is given in which Queen Ramonda discusses discusses how other nations such as France and the United States have been trying to plunder vibranium from Wakandans as a result of them being a bit more cautious in their worldly involvement. Now that they're being seen as a threat, and even threatened by Talokan, Wakanda has very good reasons for wanting to go back to the isolation they had for millennia. Namor threatens war with Wakanda if they do not present him with the person who created the vibranium locating machine. This brings a very real and unfair threat to the doors of Wakanda, but also presents an existential threat. Many of the fables and beliefs of Wakanda stem from the meteor that crash-landed there, making it such a vibranium-rich environment. These stories and myths that made them feel special are now questioned because locating other pockets of vibranium around the world, namely in Talokan, changes everything they had created about their culture, their beliefs, their very way of life. It causes Ramonda and Shuri and Wakanda to spiral further into their loss of self in the wake of T'Challa's death. This makes them reevaluate why we ourselves put our faith into something higher, a community, a culture, a religion. Is it for comfort? Is it out of fear? Out of love? The answer to that question is more important to the individual than any sort of objective understanding of the ideas of faith as a whole. The how is more important than the why. That's what ultimately matters, and the sooner we come to terms with that, the sooner we can grow, move on, and make peace with what's happened. Foundation is shaken within Shuri when she finally is able to recreate the heart-shaped herb and become the next Black Panther. Her motivations, however, are not the most noble, especially considering how Namor attacked Wakanda and in so doing, killed Queen Ramonda. So she is stepping into this mantle not for noble reasons, not to protect the people of Wakanda and finally give them something to hope for again, but for vengeance. And just as a side note, I don't love that they killed Queen Ramonda. I understand why the narrative required her to die, but it feels like a bit of a holdover from the first draft in which T'Challa was still the lead of this film. It just feels like for a movie that has grief and loss so intrinsically baked into the DNA of the narrative, for the loss of Chadwick Boseman to loom large over the entire film, killing such an integral character like Queen Ramonda just didn't sit right with me. I mean, it is a bold move to do something like that given the nature of the film, and I respect it. I like the fact that it's a creative decision I just disagree with as opposed to a corporate mandate. But nevertheless, I just don't think it should have happened. It made a pretty bleak film even more bleak. But anyways, when Shuri enters into the ancestral plane, instead of Ramonda, her mother, or T'Challa, her brother, she sees Killmonger. Shuri is stunned, confused. It almost disrupts her faith entirely in the idea of the Black Panther. She sees it as a sign of who she is and the answer to her why. Even if she refused to believe it initially, she feels betrayed. The reality is, she held so much anger and hate in her heart that is what brought Killmonger to the forefront of her vision. She's staring at her own reflection if she continues to go down the path that she is on. Killmonger was there as a warning, not as a sentence. A lot has brought Shuri to this moment. A lot of heroic actions were taken, such as not handing over Riri Williams, aka Ironheart, to Namor. She was the one who created the vibranium locator, and as an act of justice, Namor wants to execute her. I don't love the inclusion of Riri Williams. There is some stuff that I like, and again, I understand the point of including her, but it kind of feels like a square peg in a round hole for this movie. They're trying to invoke that Iron Man imagery from her Mark I arrival, but it's all done in such a compressed timeline, and it fails further because there is no link from Riri to Tony, like at all. They're empty callbacks. For that imagery to work, there has to be some sort of connection, something that evokes in us the same emotions we felt the first time we saw Robert Downey Jr. don that armor and take off into the sky. This just feels like, well, here's your next Iron Man. Anyway, the Talokan travel on whales, ain't that fun? Oh, it's pretty fucking cool. I actually really like the fact they travel on whales. The killer whale, God, that's some of my favorite stuff in the movie. But anyways, that's not why I'm watching this movie. I'm watching this movie for the characters and the themes, and yeah, that feels like a back backdoor pilot into the Ironheart film series, whatever the f***. But the fact of the matter is that Riri really helps Shuri along her journey. Even before she becomes the next Black Panther, she has a good heart and wants to help people. The problem with this is, outside of showing Shuri's base heroic instincts and being the physical embodiment of a MacGuffin, which I don't love that trend that we've seen from Marvel between Riri and America Chavez, just not great, but okay. I think this does serve as another great parallel to Shuri and how this young girl who lost her father honored him by becoming this genius, working on her suits and restoring the car they started together, or whatever they were doing with the car. It was cute, it was sweet, I loved it. The point is, Riri is honoring his memory and weaving it into the fabric of who she is while still being her own person and moving forward with her life. Something Shuri is still trying to figure out how to come to terms with throughout the movie. But when she becomes the Black Panther, the hate that consumed Namor has also consumed Shuri. I just buried the last person who truly knew me, Shuri says in regards to Queen Ramonda's death. My heart's buried with her. Her heart has become an all-consuming void of pain and emotion. How does she fill that void? Well, that's the easy answer, by restoring Wakanda's Black Panther, giving her people a protector again. Well, kinda. What they don't realize, though, is her why. She's doing it to kill Namor, to enact revenge and, in her mind, fill the hole in her heart. But, as we've already discussed, the why isn't going to save her. It's not going to heal her or save Wakanda from the looming threat of war. In fact, it would further damn her people to a seemingly eternity of war with Talokan if she murders their god in front of them. Because Namor isn't a king or a protector. He is the lifeblood of his people. You kill him, their people lose their faith and fall into anger, despair, destruction, nihilism. They send wave upon wave of legions to obliterate Wakanda because what's the f***ing point? What do they have to lose when they've had the person they love taken from them? Shuri's final confrontation with Namor, if she kills him, is a reflection of the pain and grief she's just experienced and that is driving her. She's forced to confront the darkness within and make a decision her family, her mother, her brother would be proud of. She has to remember who she is. Hardship after hardship is thrown the way of our protagonists in this film. As Ramonda says,
I am queen of the most powerful nation in the world, and my entire family is gone.
The weight of the world is on her shoulders, and she still shoulders on because
that's what heroes do.
You also get to feel the personal weight of these consequences in characters like Nakia, who speaks about how everyone saw T'Challa as the Black Panther or their king, but to her, he was just T'Challa, her love. Nakia shows what can happen once you come to terms with what has happened in your past, both good and bad. Though she doesn't live in Wakanda anymore, she is still proudly Wakandan, but she's modernized it a bit, blending her tradition with the progress and compassion of the modern world. God, I wish Nakia was in this film more because she is such a great comparison for how to healthily overcome your past wounds. Seeing her in more scenes with Shuri, who throughout the entire film is having a hard time fighting off the darkness that has been caused by losing so much. Those wounds run deep. Those wounds are felt throughout this movie. They're its lifeblood, but this is a film about being able to conquer those wounds, being better because of that. And in Shuri's final confrontation with Namor, she isn't out for blood. I mean, she does beat the shit out of him and clipping those ankle wings. Yeesh. But when it matters most, she exercises compassion. She cares deeply for the people of Wakanda, much as Namor does for the people of Talokan. Vengeance and hate only creates more vengeance and hate. So she finally becomes the protector of Wakanda. She finally becomes the Black Panther. By sparing Namor and showing him that the idea of the world making sense if you force it to isn't true. That compassion and empathy and love is what's going to get us through tough times. That we are more than what we suffer. Now look, I said this at the beginning, but the movie definitely has some issues. Maybe a bit too many for my liking. it's clunkily stitched together with inconsistent pacing. I did not at all care for the Ross subplot, which often grinds the film to a halt in order to set up Thunderbolts or Captain America 4 or whatever, and it's at odds with Ryan Coogler's vision. It's definitely not as egregious as other MCU tie-ins like what we got in something like Shang-Chi, but you actively feel Coogler's vision trying to break free from the confines of the interconnectivity, and honestly, in this film, he should have been allowed to. While they can't exactly be lifted from the film entirely, for as much as I don't care about that subplot, it is intrinsically woven into the story, you just want to get out of those scenes as fast as possible and back to Namor, Shuri, Ramonda, shit man, Nakia and M'Baku even, because Lord knows the latter two were majorly shafted this go around, annoyingly so. If they were gonna do this subplot, I wanted it to have more of a connection to the geopolitics of the looming conflict Wakanda faces given the setup. The problem is, the tension with the US, the tension with the United States government never amounts to anything more than an empty threat to force Wakanda into a corner for the final confrontation with Namor. There's a lot that could have been explored about Namor using imperialist tactics, the tactics of his enemies, to pit Wakanda against the rest of the world, namely the US, who believes the Wakandans are the ones behind an attack on them. It plays into imperialistic strategies of pitting rival tribes against each other. The problem is, I don't know if that really works when it's Wakanda against the US, especially since Wakanda was almost an allegory for the United States in the first film. I feel the comment is fumbled, like it should have been the US pitting Talokan against Wakanda. That would have made the point stronger. The whole subplot of the film just collapses in onto itself. And yet, despite all of that, through all the corporate mandates for the cinematic universe and tangled web of convolution, you can still feel the passion and love and vision of Ryan Coogler and his team, a team dedicated to honor the memory of Chadwick Boseman and the legacy he has left behind. The impact that films like this can have on people and their ability to allow us all some catharsis on a shared emotion. And that's what matters. Is the film a bit of a retread of the same things they were touching on in the first Black Panther? Yeah, but it does it in a geopolitical way as opposed to the first film's more introspective sensibilities. The role the Black community plays in the treatment of their own people. It examines that idea on a macro level now that Wakanda has announced itself and its resources to the rest of the world. It's tackling it from a political and emotional side and exploring the dangers of political decisions motivated by emotions, in this case, grief, loss, and vengeance. The movie is a little cluttered, a little bloated, with excessive plot lines that often make it hard to feel the emotional weight of what the film is really trying to get at. There's this numbness that falls upon the entirety of the film, and look, it can be effective, right? It can be melancholic and somber, and it can emphasize the more human moments of the mourning process, but it can also make you feel a bit underwhelmed at the same time. I actually equate it to the feeling you get while watching Spectre, something that is drenched in this moodiness, this melancholy, and the film doesn't crescendo or fall as strongly as it perhaps should be, given the spectacle and the story and the themes at play here. And similar to Spectre, it's messy as hell. It's trying to tackle one too many ideas, and their reach far extends their grasp. They really should have just simplified it a bit more. But that's not to say it's completely broken, and there are parts of this that also remind me a bit of Batman v Superman. And look, the messiness is part of what makes it interesting, and we all know I love BVS, so maybe I'll completely come around on Wakanda Forever with subsequent viewings. It's certainly the most mature film Marvel has ever made, and delivers on spectacle, emotion, character, and just downright filmmaking prowess. It has this incredible quality of allowing us to exit the film in this quiet, somber, reflective way that allows us to better understand our mourning process and how to move on. Those beautiful human moments that film and storytelling in general have the power of giving to an audience. This is the perfect example of what these Marvel movies can be when you dedicate the proper amount of time and resources to a project and allow the filmmaker at the helm to put his stamp on things. Wakanda Forever feels handcrafted by an artist, flaws and all, and that's the beauty of it.